After almost 1,000 years of being asleep and trapped inside a coffin, Rai, the most powerful noble to ever exist, finally wakes up, and upon waking up, he realizes how much the world has changed during his sleep. Everything is different now in the modern-day Japan. Humanity has now grown a lot, and the dominion of his people known as the nobles has basically perished from the world. As before, these powerful beings known as nobles were in a position of power, and once upon a time, they were worshipped by humans and even treated like rulers and sometimes even gods. But that was around about 820 years ago. And here, Rai tries his best to recreate even just a small fraction of what he remembers from his time, to remain faithful to his heritage. But while doing so, he has to try and be a normal student at high school, even though he's actually the most powerful being to ever exist. And at the same time, he's being followed by a criminal group who despises the power that the nobles have and the fame they had over humanity. It all begins on a little boat with a group of men from the Union who find a coffin in the middle of nowhere and take it to an abandoned warehouse. They try for several hours to open the coffin, however no matter what they do, it didn't open, so they all just left it for the night and said they will try again tomorrow. However, on that same night, once the full moon came out, Rai, the most powerful one of his kind, suddenly woke up. The next day, Rai immediately went searching for his assistant named Frankenstein, who was the headmaster of a school at this time. But when Rai arrived, he was met by another student, a guy named Shinwoo, who was late for school and was not allowed to enter the gates. He greets Rai, and then asks himself how he's never seen a student with his looks before. But while he's thinking who it is, the gates opened and the boy magically disappeared. Rai went straight to the principal's office, as he could sense where his assistant Frank was in the building, and while Rai stands outside about to knock, Frankenstein already felt his presence and immediately opened the door and knelt down to meet him, calling Rai his master, and welcomes him back to the land of the living. After, Frankenstein tells Rai it's been 820 years and he's been patiently waiting for his return. Rai asks Frank what era they are calling this, and Frank tells him it's the 21st century now, and due to Rai's long sleep, he feels like he needs to be educated on the modern era, so he asks Frankenstein if he can study here. Later on, Rai goes to class, and here the teacher welcomes him and introduces him to the rest of the class. Rai then introduces himself as his full name, Kadizatrama Dai Razel. After his introduction, Shinwoo shouts out saying this is the boy he saw earlier, but he randomly vanished into thin air. The teacher tells Shinwoo that Rai will be sitting next to him since Shinwoo already knew about him at the start of school. But this makes all the girls stare at Shinwoo out of jealousy. Meanwhile, two of the men from the organization called the Union return back to the abandoned warehouse and find that the coffin has been taken. These two men are known as M21 and M24, and they were the ones in charge of taking the coffin. However, upon arriving, it's no longer there, and they were both angry at the watchman who was looking after the coffin. They thought the man was lying about the coffin's whereabouts, however, to see if he's telling the truth or not. M24 bites the man's neck, and this reveals parts of the watchman's memories, and inside his head he can see a female witness in his memory, and used it to track her down and find the woman so they can get the answers they were looking for. After the watchman, who was bit by M24, has transformed into some kind of monster and who now works for the organization. After, back in school, Rai was in the canteen area with Shinwoo, with all the girls who are staring at him, and here, Shinwoo is so surprised that Rai doesn't even know what ramen noodles are, and has never heard of any of these popular Japanese dishes before, so Shinwoo helps him understand it all and also taste the food. But inside Rai's head, he thinks it's poison or maybe a trap, but after tasting it, it becomes his favorite dish. On their way home from school, Rai is walking with Shinwoo and Ikan, and they hear screams coming from under the highway roads, and here we see a student named Yana getting attacked by the monster who was bitten by M24. The monster had tracked down Yuna as she was the witness in the dreams before the coffin was taken. So Shinwoo quickly ran up to the monster like an absolute maniac and drop-kicked him in the face like Bruce Lee, and knocking the monster into the ground, and saving his friend Yuna. At this moment, the others see the monster get back up and get scared, and they all quickly run away. However, Rai didn't even care about the monster and stood perfectly still. His eyes began to light up red and he could sense something around the corner, and it was M21 and M24 who were hiding. After, they both realize that there's something different about Rai, as he doesn't seem like an ordinary guy, and they have no idea that he was the one who came out of the coffin that they're searching for. After running away, they find a safe spot in the park. And after, M21 and M24 are seen in the alleyway with the monster they created, and they decide that following Yuna is still the best plan of action, as she's the only one who saw what happened and what came out of the coffin that night. While they talk, we learn that these two are working with others in an organization called the Union, and this organization does a lot of shady things, like experiments on humans in order to try and create people with powers, just like M21 and M24. And as a result, M24 is now some kind of vampire with super strength and M21 is a werewolf demon. Here we meet two other people from the sketchy organization group, named Jake and Mary, who are M21 and M24's superiors, and they tell them that they must find the coffin as soon as possible, otherwise they will be eliminated, as they are only subordinates created by the organization, and they are treated like worthless scumbags. We see in a flashback at the organization headquarters where M21 and M24 were created, and they received orders to retrieve the coffin, as Jake knew that the powerful noble was inside it. But after learning about the power within inside the coffin, M21 and M24 were going to take the power from the coffin and use it against the organization for revenge on what they did to them, and the others in the lab, where they treated them like disgusting little lab rats. After a few days of searching for the coffin, M21 and M24 saw Rai and his classmates again, and while looking down from the highest building in the city, M21 is shocked when Rai stares at them all the way from the ground and they lock eyes. Right then, their other colleagues Jake and Mary arrive at the top of the building, and Jake devises a plan to eliminate Shinwoo and his classmates, as they are the only witnesses to what happens in the organization and no one can know these monsters and experiments exist other than members inside the organization. While on their way home, Shinwoo and his friends get approached by the organization, and here, Jake appears and they are also attacked by M21. Jake is impressed by M21's fighting skills, but M21 tells Jake that one of their classmates is still missing and he's the one they need to capture the most. However, Rai was sitting with his assistant Frank, and while they were talking, Frank receives a call, and it was from Shinwoo's number, but it was a message sent by Jake as he's got their students captured at the warehouse. On the other hand, the monster was just about to eat his classmates. However, Shinwoo got up just in time to save them, and they make a run for it. Meanwhile, Rai and Frankenstein head out to search for Shinwoo and the others, and although the message wasn't clear, Frankenstein knew something was wrong and must find them before something happens to his students. While Rai and Frank fly to the destination, we see Shinwoo, Ikan, and Yuna running into the elevator, and Jake starts getting angry and kills the monster that was created by M24 as he was useless and starts to take matters into his own hands. When Jake gets to the elevator, he grabs Shinwoo and they start fighting. However, due to Jake being a highly modified human with strengths in all areas, Shinwoo didn't stand a chance, as he's just an ordinary student. But he still tried his best to defeat Jake on his own. On the other hand, M24 is standing in the background, as Shinwoo begs Jake to not harm his friends, and Shinwoo tells Jake he won't let him do it. And this was heard by M24, who remembers what Jake did to him and his friends in the organization headquarters. So M24 could not stand by and watch Jake do this again, and so he steps up to Jake and punches him with the most impressive blow to the jaw. And at this moment, M24 officially went rogue. M21 immediately found out about this, as they were on the same signal using an earpiece, and after hearing what M24 just did, Mary suddenly attacked M21 and they get into a huge fight. At this time, Jake gets back up and instantly attacks M24, but while M24 is weaker than Jake, he still manages to get a hold of Jake and blows himself up. Meanwhile, M21 is still fighting Mary and is pretty useless against her, and she performs several insane moves and overpowers M21 while calling him a dumb little bitch, and also insults his friend M24 at the same time, calling them both failed experiments and ugly worthless orphans. While roasting M21, she was just about to finish him off. However, this is when Frankenstein suddenly appears and grabs hold of Mary just in time, and Rai also follows right behind him. After M21 saw Rai again, he felt a strange feeling once again and knew something was different about him. After, Frankenstein asks Marie where the students are, but Marie tells them that they can't save them as Jake has captured them and they are already too late. But just at that moment, M21 thinks that Rai might be able to save M24 if he gets there in time, so he tells Rai the location, and after he warns Frank and Rai to get out of here, as he wants to face Marie again. But Rai doesn't allow M21 to fight, as he knows M21 will lose, and instead he orders Frank to take care of Mary, and he wants M21 to guide him to the location of Shinwoo and the others. A few minutes after the explosion, Jake got up, but M24 is nowhere to be seen. Right then, Jake confronts Shinwoo again and calls him a weak, disgusting mortal human and tells Shinwoo he loves killing low-life trash like him. But just as Jake was about to end them off, Rai arrives, and Jake remembers about the last student who was not there when they met Shinwoo. Then all of a sudden, M21 screams and attacks Jake with all his might. But once again, Jake is much stronger, so M21 just gets beat by the opponent. Right then the scene changes to Marie and Frankenstein, and here we see Marie, who witnesses how strong Frank is, and for the first time in years she is forced to transform into her true form due to the strength of Frank and his noble powers, which shocked the enemy. After seeing Marie's true form, this gives Frankenstein doubts of being victorious. However, just then, Rye gives Frankenstein permission to break his seal for the first time, and this unlocks his full potential as a noble, and we see him gain an immense amount of power, and Marie instantly gets scared of him and couldn't believe what was happening. After this, Frankenstein roasts Marie, saying that the whole organization started with the nobles, as they are just trying to copy what the nobles did, wanting to become gods like them. But Frank said they are just pathetic regular humans with lab rat powers and could never truly rule over the humans, as they just have evil intentions. And then he suddenly attacks her with a super energy blast which erupts the whole building and shatters the glass all around it, and Marie couldn't do anything about it. Meanwhile, Jake defeats M21 as M21 is too weak to fight on, and this leaves only Rye as the last one there. Jake approaches Rye and thinks that Rye is terrified of him, since Rye doesn't even look into Jake's eyes, and Jake laughs at how scared he is. Jake keeps laughing and mocks Rye, calling him many names, and tells Rye to kneel. However, Rye doesn't say a word and then uses his OP abilities and can make Jake kneel before him like his little bitch, and Rye didn't even have to lay a finger on him. After seeing this kind of power, M21 is shocked and realizes that he must be the one that the organization were talking about the whole time, and who must be the hidden power in the coffin known as Noblesse. After making Jake look like a little bitch in front of everyone, he tries getting up again. But every time he tries, Rye just smashes his head onto the floor with his mind control. After, Shinwoo tries to call out to Rye, warning him to watch out. But Rye doesn't want them to know who he really is and what he's capable of, so he puts them to sleep with the mind control, and just then, Jake finally transforms into his lab rat experimentation form, and we get to see the monster hidden inside him for the first time. And Jake turns into a massive demonic beast monster with insane amount of strength, and a being which was made to take care of major problems like Rye. However, even after this transformation, Jake still can't even touch Rye, and Rye makes him kneel again, even when Jake is in his demonic monster form. Jake then tries one last time and gathers all his strength to generate a massive swing at Rye, but Rye simply blocks it a few inches away from his face, and Jake still hasn't made any physical contact towards Rye, no matter how powerful he gets. After seeing Jake's attempts to kill Rye, Rye now takes matters into his own hands and tells Jake that he will pay for all his sins with his own blood. And just then Rye destroys Jake and blasts him into a billion pieces, and the whole building pours down red, and he gets completely erased from the universe like he was nothing at all. Meanwhile, in the middle of nowhere, an army of armed men were attacked by a group of assailants called the DA5, who belonged to a group known as the Union, or otherwise known as the Organization. The DA5 assailants, Tao, Takio, Shark, Hammer, and their leader, Kranz, were easily able to wipe out all of the armed forces using their abnormal strength, and were successful in capturing a senior scientist. As the task was successfully completed, the DA5 decided to head to Japan for their next task from the Union. Meanwhile, somewhere in Japan, two high schoolers, Shinwoo, also known as Toshiro, and his best friend Iken, or Manabu Case, return back to high school. They are greeted with a flock of girls surrounding the newly appointed security guard of the school, who is M21. From far away, our main protagonist Rye is reassured by his servant Frankenstein, also known as Frank, about Toshiro's memory being overwritten, since Toshiro previously knew that M21 was a superhuman. The night before, M21 got a job as a security guard because he used to be part of the Union. But they were after him and his friend M24 because they had special powers, and the Union considered them failed experiments. So, M21 had to keep a low profile. Now, in the current time, Frank, who is also the school chairman, lets his master Rye pretend to be a high school student even though he is the Noblesse. Rye wants to catch up on the technology that has advanced in the last 820 years. When Rye enters the classroom, he quickly becomes friends with Toshiro and doodles a cat face on his bandage. During lunch, Rye is amazed by smartphones, seeing students take pictures and talk from a distance. At recess, Rye talks to Frank and M21, expressing his desire to have a phone like everyone else. The next day, Toshiro and Manabu are surprised to see Rye with the newest and best smartphone. During lunch, a big guy in a fancy car shows up and starts picking fights with students in the sports area, looking for Toshiro. When they hear the noise, Toshiro, Rye, Manabu, and other students rush over. M21, watching from a distance, hesitates to get involved because he needs to keep a low profile. After a while, an older janitor tries to step in, but the big guy gets angry and prepares to throw a punch. Toshiro jumps in to protect the janitor, using his bandage to block the punch. The big guy recognizes Toshiro and says he's been looking for him, claiming Toshiro made a move on his girlfriend. Toshiro kept trying to explain that his girlfriend misunderstood, but the big guy was determined to beat him up. With no other option, Toshiro had to fight back, and the big guy landed a few punches before Toshiro managed to land an uppercut. Just as things were escalating, Rai had to step in and make M21 intervene. M21 quickly appeared before the big guy and easily subdued him. Frightened, the big guy told his friends to back off, hurriedly reversing his sports car to get away. Later that day, Frank apologized to M21 for unintentionally putting him in the spotlight when his goal was to lay low. Meanwhile, in Japan, the DA5, the group of attackers from earlier, stood on a skyscraper, scanning the surroundings before putting their plans into action. The next day, as M21 is about to close the school gates, two white-haired students approach him. They instruct M21 to lead them to Frank, the headmaster. Realizing that they are nobles, Frank tries to act as a normal human and enrolls them into the high school. However, he tips off Rai about the new students who are namely Regis and Sarah. As they entered their new classroom, Regis pissed his pants when he sensed a demonizing aura from Rai. And so, he decided to linger with him a little longer. At the cafeteria, Regis finds Rai intriguing. Toshiro notices Manabu crushing over Sarah and shares his plan with Rai to get them together. Meanwhile, Frank and M21 drive back towards home. On the way, M21 inquires with Frank about the nobles who were powerful beings and were sought after by the Union. Unlike the Union that used scientific methods to draw out power in humans, the nobles had innate strength. Frank adds that many centuries ago, the nobles appeared in humanity's dire time of need, and the nobles devoted themselves to protect the human race as they were comparatively stronger and possessed unique powers. For this very reason, Frank speculates that Regis avoided fighting him because Regis assumed that he was an ordinary human. M21 scoffs at the ideology of the nobles, but Frank assures him that some nobles have a different line of thinking. They believe that as society has progressed, the humans no longer need a superior race looking after them. M21 inquires if Rai and Frank were nobles, and Frank ambiguously informs him that he was correct yet incorrect at the same time. Reaching home, Frank is unamused to find Regis, Sarah, and Rai, along with his friends, clowning around his house. Unable to hide his emotions, he escapes to the kitchen to wash the dishes. Seeing that M21 was living with Frank, Toshiro suggests Frank to also let Regis and Sarah stay at his house. Frank hesitantly accepts as his master, Rai, allows the two of them to stay. Returning to the kitchen, Frank apologizes to M21 for bringing in more company when he wanted to stay low. M21 humbly thanks Frank for all he had done and lends a hand in washing the dishes. Sarah enters the room to offer her help, but Frank assures her that he had it under control. As she was leaving, Sarah noticed the number 21 tattooed on M21's hand. The next day, she informs Regis of the tattoo and speculates that M21 was an experimental subject of the Union, as the Union numbered their subjects. Believing that the disappearance of the nobless's casket was linked to M21's sudden appearance, Regis decides to trail M21. Confronting M21, Regis inquires him of his knowledge about the events surrounding the disappearance of the casket. M21 tries to lie about his involvement, but Regis does not buy his lies and urges M21 to reveal the perpetrators behind the casket's disappearance. Believing that Regis was unaware that the noblesse was already out, M21 tries to reveal insufficient information. Fed up, Regis decides to use mind control, but M21 evades it and weaponizes his hands into claws. As they are fighting, Regis is informed by Sarah about her troubled situation. A few moments prior, Toshiro, Manabu, Rai, and Sarah were heading back home. Toshiro tried to get Manabu close to Sarah, but was suddenly met with a group of strange men. They asked Toshiro to oblige with their orders as they held a knife against Rai. Hearing this, Regis and M21 head towards Toshiro and find him fighting against a mob. Regis tries to intervene, but M21 stops him, informing him that Sarah was safe. Moreover, he tells Regis that humans are not as weak as they used to be. As the mob leader pulls out a gun, M21 safeguards Toshiro. The mob, having lost the fight, leave Toshiro and his friends alone. As they head back home at night, M21 informs Regis that humans do not need the leadership of the nobles, and that humans are now more independent than they were centuries ago. Although they continue to have a little friction, Regis and M21 make up for the fight before. As they reach home, Regis informs M21 that he would keep an eye on him for the time being. Moreover, still believing that Frank was an ordinary human, Regis uses mind control to make Frank quote-unquote forget the discussion he had with M21. To make Regis believe it had worked, Frank acts like he was being mind controlled. Furthermore, Regis also uses his powers on Rai, but is unsure if his power even works on Rai due to Rai's expressionless personality. Somewhere else, the DA5 from the Union are investigating the casket disappearance, and according to Tao of the DA5, the event surrounding the disappearance was ironically covered up as a psycho rampage by the police, despite it being evidently caused by superhuman people. Moreover, since Jack and Marie, the superior superhuman models, were sent to investigate the casket before them, they assume Jack and Marie were still looking for the missing casket casket since they hadn't reported back about an infectee M21 and M24 had created. Moreover, after finding nothing about M21's and M24's current status, they assume they both are alive.